Hey guys, my name is Kris Barocsi. Welcome to Gear Corner. Today I will show you how a mono, a wet dry, and a stereo rig sounds like. I will explain the differences and we'll talk about in which situation it makes sense to use them. If you enjoy my videos and want to support the channel, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell. And don't forget to check out the description box, which is always full of timestamps, signal chain, additional infos, gear links, etc. My first proper wet dry rig experience was in 2019 at Tolman's Gearhead University, where Dan and Mick from That Pedal Show asked me to join them in an episode, in a That Pedal Show episode. And they showed me Mick's tiny wet dry pedal board, basically. That was my first time with a proper wet dry rig, and it was an absolutely crazy moment, and it's definitely unforgettable for me. So from that day on, I tried to figure out where, when, and how to use a mono, a wet dry, and a stereo rig. Where does it make most sense to use any of these three? Let's start with mono, a mono guitar rig. Let's get the obvious things out of the way. It's how it's meant to be, right? That's the traditional way of amplifying a guitar signal. One source, a guitar going with a cable into one amp, that's it. So that's clearly always gonna work and always sound right. It's really easy to mix a mono guitar signal in a band mix. Also, big plus, if you're playing mono, you don't have to carry a lot of things. You can keep a mono rig really simple. Just one guitar, one amp, a cable between them, and that's it. You can use pedals, of course, you can extend that, but the basic idea is really simple. You don't carry a lot of stuff, which is great, especially if you gig a lot and you don't have a guitar tech carrying all that for you. This guy. I have some experience with that. The only con of using a normal mono setup is when you start using effects, time-based effects, reverbs, whatever, or modulation effects, of course. And the more you turn the mix up on all these effects, like on a harmonic tremolo is something what I love. But as soon as I start to raise the depth, like the mix between the dry signal and the tremolo signal, I sort of disappear in the band mix. And that's really annoying. Same thing for reverbs, which sort of wash your guitar signal and you'll just disappear in a mix. Your directness, your straightforward, punchy guitar sound just sort of degrades slowly. And that's not very good. Let me explain my mono setup for today's video. It's gonna be my Tele going into a couple of pedals and then into the Rev Dynamis 740. You'll see the pedals on screen while they're active, and that's pretty much it. Let's try it out. All right, let's talk about stereo guitar rigs. These will obviously give you a beautiful and really wide sound. That's why most of us just enjoy stereo sounds, because our both ears get to hear something else and that just amplifies and exaggerates this bigness. A stereo rig is awesome if you're playing alone, you're practicing whatever. Your sound is not just a tiny little thing right in the middle. It's more like it fills the room, which is great. It's also fantastic in a smaller band mix, right? Let's say it's a power trio, a drummer, bass player, and you playing the guitar. Bass will stay in the middle. Like if we're talking about the stereo field of a band mix, bass will stay in the middle. Drums, well, 50-50. Bass drum and snare will stay in the middle, and then the toms and the cymbals will, of course, be spread out. But most of the things you hear in a power trio is pretty much mixed to the center. So it's just awesome to have a stereo guitar rig to fill up all that space around bass and the drums. That being said, a stereo rig can become an overkill real fast if we're talking about a crowded band mix, right? Let's say there are 2 guitar players. That's already enough to mess with that. Both guitar players playing stereo rigs, it's not easy to pan them, right? Because normally you would want the 2 guitar players to have their place in the mix. A clear con for a stereo guitar rig is that it's less direct, so you get lost in a band mix way faster than if it was a mono rig. My stereo rig is gonna be my guitar going into my pedal board, where I split the signal already for the stereo effects, and then I go into both revs. This is the Rev Dynamis 740, and that's the Rev D20. The Dynamis is running through the aux box with a 2x12 simulation, and the D20 has 2 notes, load box, and cab and mic simulation built in. I'm using a Victory copper 2x12 closeback cab simulation. And now let's talk about wet-dry rigs. If you want to know about the technical issues and all the challenges about stereo rigs and wet-dry rigs, we can talk about it in a comment time video. Just let me know in the comments, like phase issues and ground loops and everything. But there are also quite a few That Pedal Show episodes on these subjects, and Dan and Mick are absolute pros, so you can of course check that out too. Shout out to Dan and Mick, love you guys. A wet-dry rig will sit somewhere between a mono and a stereo rig, but to be honest, I see it as an extended mono rig way more than a stereo one. Why? Because you have different signals coming from both amps. In a wet-dry rig, you will have one amp having a clean or overdriven sound and no reverb, no modulation, no nothing. And the other amp gets the same clean or overdriven signal, but on top of that, you'll get the modulation effects and the time base effects, reverbs, delays, everything. And if you pan these 2 amps pretty heavily, and you'll have dry signal on the right side and wet signal on the left side, it will just feel very unbalanced and just weird. It's not a very usable mix that way. So you want to keep, even if you pan it, you want to keep it pretty centered in a mix. In this next example, I will play the wet-dry rig. The Rev Dynamis 740 is going to be dry, and the D20 is going to be wet. So I'm going into both amps with my guitar and the drive pedal, and only the D20 will get the Super Tram, the D1 delay, and the R1 reverb. huge benefit of having a wet dry rig is that you always have your 100% dry rig or dry sound in your whole sound, right? You don't have a mono rig where you just turn up the mix on a reverb and your dry signal disappears slowly. You'll have less and less dry signal, because if you have 30% reverb on your sound, then all you have left of your dry signal is 70%, right? And with a wet dry rig, you can keep your 100% dry sound, the directness, you will cut better through a band mix, blah, 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 and you can put your effects on top of that. So that's absolutely fantastic. Another huge plus for a wet dry rig is that you can use different amps. You can use a low headroom sort of crunchy amp on the dry side of your rig, and something with high headroom, something that will stay clean even at high volumes for all the effects. Another huge plus for a wet dry rig is that you can decide basically for yourself how loud your effects should be on stage. And because both amps should be mic'd anyhow, you will give the sound guy the option to have a different mix, because probably the audience needs a different amount of like effects and everything on the guitar sound than what you enjoy on stage. And the most important question about wet dry, and I think there's quite some confusion there. Where would I use it? Mainly, I would use it where a mono rig seems to be the better choice instead of a stereo one, right? Bigger band, stereo would be too much. A wet dry is going to be an upgraded mono signal for you, giving you all the freedom to decide on the mix and everything, and still hear yourself because you have 100% direct signal going on. It also makes a lot of sense if you're just not a big fan of stereo effects and you just want to have a very wide and beautiful sounding sound when you practice at home. You don't need a band necessarily to enjoy the benefits of a wet dry rig. If you run 2 amps, it doesn't just sound a little bigger, it sounds like 10 times the experience. For some reason, all the frequencies going on and the 2 different preamp power amps working on 2 different speakers, it's just such a big sound. And my last thought on a wet dry rig is that it makes a lot of sense to try it if you want to stick to an all analog rig, like simple pedals, 2 simple amps, but you just want to upgrade your mono sound. But what do you guys think about this whole subject? I mean, obviously, even if you're not using actual guitar amps, you can have the same thing going on with an amp simulation, multi-effect, plugins, whatever you want to use. You can get mono, wet dry, and stereo out of all of these solutions, basically. What do you guys think about it? And how do you run your rig? I really want to see it in the comment section. I'll be there checking out your comments, answering them and everything. See you soon. I'll be back. Bye-bye.